What's up everyone, you're Batapesh Kumar here and welcome back to another video on Boeing Boy. And today's video is so interesting. It's a cockpit story of the best pilots ever. If you ask me who's the best pilot in the world, or if you do a Google search, you will find names of a lot of pilots coming up. However, these three people, if you ask me, were the best pilots in the world for what they did. And I'm going to tell you what they did to become the best pilots in the world in my eyes. They literally landed an airliner without any flight controls using only their engines. How is that possible? You'll get to know in today's video. Let's get started. The story starts in November of 2003. A DHL Airbus A300 aircraft is taking off from Baghdad. At that time, Baghdad में काफी कुछ चल रहा था. The US had its war going on Iraq, which had just ended, and whole of Iraq was under US control. However, there were a lot of militant groups active in Iraq and they were just targeting civilians and foreigners as well. And they also had acquired a lot of ammunition from the Iraqi army, which was now dysfunctional. As a result, they had acquired surface-to-air missiles. And they used one of these surface-to-air missiles on this Airbus A300, which was just about to take off from Baghdad. It was carrying cargo. It was a cargo flight. It had 3 pilots on board, so basically 2 pilots and 1 flight engineer, and they were carrying letters from the US Army back to their homes. Now the aircraft took off from runway 15 right in Baghdad, and because they knew that there's a threat of attack from the ground, what they did was they took off with slats only and full thrust at a low speed so they could climb out faster above 10,000 feet, because the surface to air missiles could hit their aircraft till a height of about 10,000 feet. Now when they were climbing out at about 8,000 feet, suddenly the whole aircraft just rocked and the crew felt as if they had hit an unseen and unknown aircraft. But in reality, what had happened was a surface-to-air missile had been fired from the ground and it had hit the left wing of the aircraft. Now as soon as the missile hit the wing, it broke off the trailing edge of the wing into pieces. All the fuel in the tank just fell out. It didn't leak out, it just fell out. And the bigger problem was the hydraulic lines of the aircraft were all severed. The aircraft has 3 hydraulic systems, blue, green and yellow, and all the 3 hydraulic lines were punctured. As a result, all the hydraulic fluid on the aircraft went out. Now, unlike a conventional aircraft, these modern airplanes, they have hydraulic systems, and those hydraulic systems are used to move all the primary and the secondary flight controls. However, without the hydraulic systems, there's just no way of moving the flight controls. Basically what happens is the pilot gives an input, the input goes to a hydraulic actuator, and the hydraulic actuator actually moves the flight control. But without the hydraulic fluid, the hydraulic actuator cannot move, and as a result, the crew had lost their rudders, their aileron, their flaps, and their elevators, basically all flight controls, including the horizontal stabilizer. Now, they were only left with their 2 engines. Luckily, none of the engines got damaged and you still had fuel on the aircraft, so both the engines were running. Also, the crew had no idea, but the left wing was on fire. It had a 50-meter long flame coming out of it. The entire rear part of the left wing was just burning off. And the spars, which is basically the structure that holds the wing in place, the rear spar had broken and only the forward spar was holding the wing. A little more stress on the aircraft or a little more of flying time and that tip of the wing would just break. And if that tip of the wing would break, it would be done. You couldn't fly an aircraft with a broken wing. But they did fly an aircraft with a wing on fire. Now how do you control an aircraft with only 2 engines and no flight controls? How do you climb, descend? How do you turn? Basically, modern airplanes, most of them have low slung engines, which means the engines are beneath the wings. As a result, when you add power or you increase thrust, the aircraft tends to pitch up. When you reduce power, the aircraft tends to pitch down. If you use asymmetrical thrust, for example, more thrust on the left engine and less thrust on the right engine, the aircraft will start turning towards the right. And this is what the crew had to use to learn to fly the aircraft. Now the problem is, there is no training for this. You are never trained on an emergency where you have to fly the aircraft using only your engines. The crew took good 10 minutes flying over Baghdad, trying to stabilize the aircraft and trying to learn how to fly by using thrust forward back or asymmetric thrust. During these 10 minutes, the aircraft speed went all the way from 180 knots all the way till 300 knots. The aircraft kept on going up and down, up and down, up and down. They just kept on descending, climbing, till the time after about 10 odd minutes they finally learned how to fly the aircraft, and they finally managed to stabilize the flight path of the aircraft. In the meantime, the terrorists on the ground, they actually fired one more missile at the aircraft. However, luckily for the crew, that second missile missed the aircraft and it just went somewhere else. But they continued flying, and at the end of about 10 minutes they were finally ready to try an approach. Now for the approach, they had to lower the landing gear. So if you don't have hydraulic systems on the aircraft, you can still lower the landing gear by the use of gravity. So you just open the locks which hold the landing gear up, and the landing gear will fall down because of gravity, which is what they did. And luckily for the crew, the landing gear deployed in the first attempt itself. But the problem was the landing gear creates a lot of drag on the aircraft, and it totally changed the dynamics of the aircraft and how it would fly using just the engines. Because till now they were flying without the landing gear, and now suddenly you have this huge thing hanging down from the aircraft creating drag. So they had to again learn how to fly the aircraft with the landing gear down. But luckily for them, the aircraft actually felt a lot more stable when the landing gear was down, because the additional drag gave the aircraft some stability. And with finally having learned how to operate the aircraft with the landing gear down, but having nothing on the aircraft except the two engines, the pilots decided to make an approach. They chose an approach for runway 33 left, which was although the shorter runway, but it was far away from obstacles, and made a very long approach on it. In that approach, they were descending. They were almost stabilized at 1000 feet. Can you believe that? They were stabilized at 1000 feet. But the problem was they were carrying a lot of extra speed. They were flying at somewhere close to about 210 knots, which is approximately about 100 kilometers per hour faster than you would normally fly. So they were doing about 300 kilometers an hour instead of about 210 to 20 kilometers per hour. But the struggle was not over. When they were at about 400 feet above the ground, the thermals from the air, the turbulent air which is close to the ground because of heating, that air totally upset their flight path, and they just started drifting here and there. However, the pilots still managed by using asymmetric thrust, and they landed the aircraft on the runway. Can you believe that? They landed the airplane on the runway using only and only thrust. As per reports and what I read online, the rate of descent when they touched down on the runway was just about 10 feet per minute, and that is an extremely good landing. However, after landing, directional control of the aircraft was a problem, because obviously they didn't have any steering or anything. As a result, they ended up going outside of the runway after landing. They threw up a lot of dust because the engines were on reverse thrust, but the aircraft eventually came to a stop after somewhere about 3000 feet, and all the crew were safe. They had landed an airliner, a 100-ton aircraft, on the runway with just their engines. That is unbelievable. In such a situation, you don't have any checklist, you don't have any procedures, you don't have any previous training for this. Everything goes out of the window, and all that you have is your brain, is your heart, and your experience. And that's what these three guys used. They worked as a team. On the CVR recordings, they all sound absolutely calm, and they've managed it. Unbelievable. Like, it literally gives me goosebumps. मेरे यहाँ पे हाथों के बाल खड़े हो रहे हैं as I'm telling you guys this story. These guys were just amazing. After the landing, however, another very bad incident happened with them. So when they landed, they evacuated from the aircraft. They came out of the aircraft and they started walking away from the aircraft because they thought it might just blow up. However, they were stopped by the fire personnel and they were told to stay where they are, because the area on which they were standing, that area had unexploded mines. But they eventually managed to walk out with the help of the firefighters, and everyone was safe. Salute to them. Hats off. What you guys did was just impossible, and how you managed it, I just can't believe it. So that was the story of the DHL flight Airbus A300, which got hit by a missile, had a fire on the wing, had no flight controls, no hydraulics, and they managed to walk away from it. Epic story. I hope you guys liked it. If you did, please subscribe to the channel, leave a thumbs up, let me know in the comments if you guys want more cockpit stories. I know you love them, I love them too. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.